did. Sorry. If anyone wants to get out,
The trucks will go to the company to like the other
that'll be fun. It's nice to just. Right. And I was covering the time. Well, we know where that resort is because we got married further up that coast. We drove past it. Yeah. We met my brother in Australia, we stayed on the east side. At Bellows Air Force. And that, she actually met up. Yes. Well, this is the first time I'm seeing.
Good morning. We're live streaming and YouTubing and here, so we're hoping it all works. We will turn that off after we watch the video, so you won't have to see everybody. But they will be a part of the class. Welcome. So I guess that's it. Right now, we'll see who else who comes. Welcome to summer ABC class. This summer, we're going to be having dialogues about critical topics, interesting topics around sexuality, around race relations, and around the refugee crisis over the next 6 weeks. We're doing the sexuality first. We're likely to do the race relations in the middle of the summer and finish up with the refugee crisis. Heather McKee is helping to teach, is actually leading today. Heather is an elder of the church and co-chair of the Social Justice Committee. She also has a degree from Master's of Divinity from Princeton Theological Seminary. You see how much we talked about this beforehand. Let's pray. Good and gracious God, we give you thanks for this day, for this time, for the ability to have honest and sometimes hard conversations. Open our hearts and our minds to hear what you would have us hear and to listen to each other. Amen. So this is a dialogue class, so we're expecting there to be some dialogue. When you look around our church, what kind of community do you see? What kind of people are present in this church? White people?
Older middle age.
Older middle age? Who else? Educated, affluent. Heteronormative. You want to describe what that means? Heather? Hey, turn on your mic.
It means kind of a presentation expectation that people are heterosexual. So.
Generally, we all grew up in a church environment, and mainline denomination is not.
Largely grew up church, grew up mainline. Who don't we see? Who's missing? People of color? People of color other than white? Low socioeconomic?
Or no, the flamboyant.
Yeah. Right. LGBTQ people who present differently.
Who else?
People who are very, I want to say angelical, but that's not what I mean, but flamboyant, worship very, amen.
Demonstrative in worship?
Yes.
What challenges would bring to our church if those people started coming and participated in worship into the life of the church? What challenges, Bill?
About 55 years ago, I was a high school senior, and I was sitting over there in a meeting. It was not a Sunday school class. It was about race relations. They had shown the film, and somebody said, "What if a black person came to worship here?" Any black person. And one of our esteemed elders said, "I would get up and walk out," because he was doing it for show. And somebody said, "What if he sneaked in quietly, sat in the back, and nobody noticed him except the choir and the preacher?" And he said his purpose would still be for show, and I wouldn't do it. And somebody said, "You can do that for show." It was a really contentious discussion. The whole meeting wasn't, but that little snippet of it was. I was with here for about 3 months. I was a high school senior, very conscious of that kind of stuff. It was the first year of immigration for charter schools, and it was very disturbing. I don't think that attitude is totally gone, but I think it's a very underground.
Okay, oh gosh, when you said you think it's underground, I would like to say.
I hope
It's
not
not small.
Yeah, no, I think it was tiny then.
Okay. Because, but I think about sometimes, I feel like it's a cool art church. I think we're inviting and welcoming. I think how incredibly hard it would be if I were that person of color to walk in those doors. And I don't know how maybe that's why we're in Sunday school today. I don't know what I can do to make it hard for that probably one person, maybe two, who doesn't resemble us to walk in.
And it's complicated a little bit maybe with just racial, because race aside, the culture is different. Because at least stereotypically, the black church has extended services with kind of the talking out loud and so forth. So it's more, I think that's complicated by, it's not just race alone, but it's style. Yeah. We should start our services.
We go in the whole class, so everything we're talking about is that model. But because there hasn't been a Sunday school program for the last few weeks, we've gone to the 9:45 service. It's not the same. There is more of a liveliness there. It's not quite what BA did. It's close. You know, our first jokes of these 30
Starting that service. Right, so it was like something that's interactive.
So we're going to watch a video about. I'm sorry, Linda. Say more about that.
our town. I mean, when we moved here 30 years ago, at Davis Elementary, my son's first grade class, there were 2 classes. In first grade. There were 8 African American. When he graduated, as the first 5th grade class to graduate, there were 5 5th grade classes and 4. Is now at the new development out near me in West Branch. It's the cost of houses not quite as expensive as more. I mean, it's Alabama. I mean, it's just not the town I live to, not because there are too many people, because they're not, it's not diverse. I mean, there's no diversity. And so I think that's, I don't know that that speaks to our topic today of diversity and sexuality. It should, I don't think, I think that cuts across all socioeconomic, I think coming out of the school system, out of a very rural school system, I know it cuts across race and economics, but because I'm mostly white, well, so it's a white, half Hispanic school, very rural, very poor. But this is the location at the town.
So we're going to watch a brief 8-minute video about a church in Minneapolis who struggled with what does it mean to be opening, accepting to all.
When I arrived, the church was in trouble. They had had a 50-year decline. They had $500,000 annual deficit. There were 50 people in a 1,800-seat auditorium. Average age was over 80. There wasn't a plan. Now I know we were probably 3 years from bankruptcy.
Pastor Dan Collis's experience at First Covenant Church in downtown Minneapolis is alarmingly common. Across the United States, many congregations are rapidly aging and shrinking. The number of Americans who identify as Christian have been declining for decades. And even among those who identify as Christian, only 47% regularly attend church services. Meanwhile, the number of Americans identifying as non-religious continues to grow, now making up 23% of the total U.S. population, and spikes among millennials at 36%. An increasing number of religiously unaffiliated Americans are LGBTQ.
I would say at least half of our congregation is over 70 now. A significant portion are in their 80s and 90s, and there are younger people coming in and filling the pews. So what do? Do we let the church die, or do we recognize that society has changed and shifted?
When my family moved here, when we began meeting neighbors, when I began doing volunteer work in the business community, and said I was a pastor and a part of First Covenant Church, the number one conversation by far was, will my gay neighbor be welcome?
Minneapolis has a large and vocal population of LGBTQ residents, and has for decades. As LGBTQ people become more visible and accepted around the country, many churches' leadership have been slow to find ways to adapt.
There was a cynicism. There was sort of even an anger of communities of faith and pastors not being able to be accepting of the LGBTQ community.
This skepticism is both common and warranted. According to Pew Research, only 35% of white evangelical Protestants support same-sex marriage. Numbers among white mainline Protestants are higher at 68%. But approving of same-sex marriage is not the same as a welcoming faith community. Across all denominations, More than 1/3 of LGBTQ people report being made to feel unwelcome at their places of worship.
It wasn't concern 10, it wasn't concern 5, it was concern 1 when it came to, well, what kind of church are you and who are you and how do you see the world?
The entire society is flipping and switching, and the church is probably 20 years behind the rest of society. What is our theology telling us? Is our theology telling us to send people away or bring people in?
Not embracing difference has led to a Christian church that, while united by the Gospels, is highly segregated in views.
The 20th century, a lot of our church growth movement was about sameness. It was about building a certain homogeneity to advance the kingdom of God. To me, part of our racial concerns right now are because we didn't have a theology of difference.
Some churches are content to remain homogenous. According to a 2015 study, more than half of U.S. churchgoers disagree that their church should be more diverse.
And now with human sexuality, I think it's a different conversation, but the same path of sacred difference, of identity. There's been gay people since humans have been humans, and the church has largely rejected them outright.
As the call for inclusivity of the LGBTQ community grows, the issue of sexuality is now seen as one of the most heated and pivotal debates in the church.
This mindset that somehow human sexuality, based upon our systematic theology, is an essential. Like it's right at the top. Like, do you believe in Jesus and the resurrection? And right alongside it, do you believe in heterosexual marriage? To me, that actually is a tell that something has been out of balance in the way we discern our humanity.
Well, God bless you. It's a joy to come into your homes. If you're ever in our area, please stop by and be a part of one of our services. I promise you, we'll make you feel right at home. You know, Jake, it's a fine line. We're for everybody, but of course, as a Christian pastor, you know, my base is off what I believe the Scripture says, and it's between, you know, marriage between a male and a female. But again, we're for everybody, and but that's where I draw the line.
In the time of Jesus, the teachers of Hebrew law, the Pharisees, were known for their strict adherence to traditional religious practices and their exclusion of those regarded as sinful and unclean. Today, not for nothing, the word means a self-righteous hypocrite. In Luke 11, Jesus says to the Pharisees, "Woe to you, because you load people down with burdens they can hardly carry, and you yourselves will not lift one finger to help them." He calls them foolish people who clean the outside of their cup, but on the inside are full of greed and wickedness, rebuking them for neglecting justice and the love of God, comparing them to unmarked graves.
So then you come to Jesus, who's like, what is it that's causing this harm? What is it that's causing this exclusion? Well, it's the religious leaders. And so as I read that text, it's like loading people up and saying, really, there's no way for you to be accepted. And it's why it doesn't get preached on much, because it's Jesus speaking to religious systems. It's Jesus speaking to people who are trying to protect God.
You can ignore the fact that there are demons, and some of them stand behind keyboards and leads praise and worship, and they're some of the most aggressive demons that we've ever encountered, because it's a spirit of homosexuality that we have been taught by the culture that we're supposed to tolerate, when the Bible clearly says it's supposed to be cast out.
Some people say, we don't want to go the way of the world. It's my experience that this is actually, inclusion is like the way of holiness. This isn't about letting people sin more. This is about protecting those who are vulnerable and marginalized. This isn't about allowing immorality. It's about putting your arms around those who want to share the same lived experience as you and seeing everyone as equals.
The necessary work of inclusion may seem self-evident to some churches, while others risk a great deal by creating an affirming space. But the work is crucial for the future of churches and for the safety of LGBTQ individuals.
I have no choice. I must speak out. My very life is at stake. But those who are not transgender don't have to speak out. So when they choose to, others pay attention. They take note. So we need advocates, we need allies.
And for so long, the voices that have been heard in the conversation around sexuality have been primarily straight, cis, white men.
Today I call upon the Congress to promptly pass and to send to the states for ratification an amendment to our Constitution defining and protecting marriage as a union of a man and woman as husband and wife.
Now it's time to sort of center the voices that have been unheard. So that's the trans voices, that's the people of color, that's the women, and that's all the intersections thereof.
So that's where we began, stories. It was Lisa, and it was Heather, and it was Ethan, and it was just people in our community who we knew telling us their stories. Some came out, right, while we were in community, and it was a big and important moment saying, I'm gay, and this is who I am. And those became the moments where we had to then dig deep into theology. We had to understand the philosophical and the scientific parameters. And ultimately, it was the church, not me as the pastor, but the church that said, let's keep moving. Let's keep having these conversations and getting clearer.
Building bridges between communities can be challenging and often puts a church at risk of losing existing members.
Becoming inclusive, it is not a church grow model. It's actually puts you in the lane of like that really hard work of social justice, of identity sharing, of recognizing I don't live that experience. I don't even know what that feels like. And so I want to say our success has come from elevating people's real stories. Yeah, do the theology. Yeah, do the philosophy. Be very careful. But ultimately, it's about bringing forward people and saying, see the love of Christ in them. See their commitments to our essentials of faith. The cost is high. I mean, this is important for everyone to understand, although it's always high, for you to choose to come alongside those who've, to this point, been either left out or marginalized or misunderstood. Yeah, we don't get awards, we don't get on magazines, we don't get the microphone, but what we do get is an internal sense of integrity. Like we can come here every week knowing that Christ is for everyone.
Okay. So I want to thank the faith.
Make sure that's off.
I did turn it off. It's off now. To understand racial fellowship.
in my community. But thankfully, and we'll talk more about this a little bit later, in 2011, the PCUSA decided, after a great deal of sacrifice by LGBTQ people, and there's someone here in this place today who was part of that work. I think it's really important to understand that as much as we love our cisgender, which means folks who identify as the gender which they were assigned at birth, and heterosexual allies have done, it really has been the witness and the work of the LGBTQ community that has brought about all this wonderful change within our denomination. So that's where we are today, and we have an opportunity here today to have a dialogue. And what I want to do to start us out is just to get some reactions to the video we just saw. Do you all have any thoughts, observations?
Would it work if we use the portable mic only?
Let me try that.
Is that on there?
Well, the sound will be that. From his laptop.
And just so you all know, planning,
Okay. Want me to stay here, John?
I think you can go, if you leave off, then you can go wherever.
Okay. So I just want to get your reactions to the video. John,
Just that reaction is also blended with an article I read in your class, breakfast, pointed out that American Catholic bishops tried to censor Joe Biden. And then watching the video, listening to the description about Jesus' love versus the Pharisees, this notion that you must honor every word he puts in the whole sort of thing. And I found myself thinking in both contexts, in too many instances, the church has become, maybe it always has been, it certainly has become, is the institution, the preserver of conservatism. Things must stay the way they are. And that's what this bedrock principle is too long. And whether it's with respect to sexual identity or racial issues, abortion, the church has found itself in a position where it feels like it needs to preserve the culture that it places.
Can you summarize that just a little bit for?
Sure. So Joe noted that, reading about the Catholic bishop's decision around Joe Biden's denied meaning, that it often is the case that the church as an institution, it's almost like a self-preservation of the institution rather than acting as Christ would have us towards others. Is that an accurate?
Yep.
So.
I would throw out, just respectfully, I don't know all these opinions, but I grew up Southern Baptist. So I guess I'm taking issue with it's cultural. For a lot of them, it probably is, them being fundamentalist and evangelical. But based on my background, I think it's interesting, and I think it's harder to come back because for some of them, I think what you're saying is true to a large degree. But I think a lot of them ultimately, they really still, they believe abortion is murder, homosexuality is a sin. And that's where they're coming from, almost it's hard to balance for us, but they're coming from a heartfelt, sincere, I want to save you from your whatever. So it's not so much, it is, but for some of them, which makes it harder, it's beyond culture. It's they really heartfeltly, this is God's command to not condone sin. It's that fine line for them to love despite sin, yet feel like they're accepted. It took me a long time to realize the science to support this. but it's a hard road to hoe for someone who really feels that it's a salvation issue more than a cultural issue.
Do you feel like our is welcoming to members of the LGBT community, or is that too broad a question?
And that's a great question. It's actually kind of a core question that we want to talk about a little bit. I was going to do that later, but let's do that now, because I think that's a really important question. And thank you for asking me, because a lot of times what happens is people, and I learned a lot about this in my efforts in studying a better ally and on racial justice issues, is that a lot of times, you know, as white people, I'm using the racial, a lot of times as white people, we think we know what's best, you know, and we think we can, you know, say, well, you know, Black folks they'll love this, and then it'll just be horrible, offensive, and all of that. So the same is true, I believe, when we talk about how do we make this community more welcoming and affirming to LGBTQ people. Well, ask LGBTQ people how they feel. And my answer is kind of based on 7 years of being here. Jane and I are married in Hawaii, and then moved back to Davis, because we both went to college here. And, you know, we both came in very publicly out. And in fact, when we first got here, this church was talking about whether or not to have equal marriage in our church. And we actually attended one of those discussion sessions. And it's a lesson that I know that it really drove it home, is that we're not talking about abstract theoretical issues, we're talking about people's lives. And sitting in that room, having Sam Maloney, John Kirkendall, these people that knew us, made a difference, because folks could look at us and say, they are whole, 3D, you know, fully formed people. They are not some abstract concept. So those are kind of the dual lessons that I would like to put forward today, is that nothing about us without us, and also that talking about these sort of issues never lose sight of the fact that you're talking about people's lives. So
We've had a number of folks who come over to DUIC.
Yeah.
Because they don't feel welcome, or they're not thrilled with the Methodist Church and not be, even as limited as we are to be welcome and say we are, right? We're trying.
yeah, and we've made some progress. I mean, in the bulletin every week, at the beginning of worship, we clearly state that we are a welcoming and affirming congregation. And just saw Peter Henry this morning, and I have to thank him for the front page, the landing page of our website now says that too. And then I mentioned earlier about looking across every aspect of our congregational life. You know, faith formation, not just adult Bible studies, not just, fellowship for adults, but looking at what the curriculum is for our children and our youth. What are they hearing? Because I can tell you, based on my own experience, when I was in 7th grade, I had a Sunday school teacher pull out a tract. And this was in the Peace USA church that said homosexuals are going to hell. Now, I was just beginning to understand who I am, who I was. And I can't tell you the damage that did to me. And it still is incredibly traumatic. So the way we teach our fellowship, are we inviting to folks that maybe don't have a family that looks like others, a nuclear family? A&P are our policies. Do we clearly state that we don't discriminate on the basis of gender identity, sexual orientation? Are we actively looking to bring in clergy and staff that may be out
as LGBTQ members, our property committee. One thing that has struck me is when you walk in the front door of that sanctuary, there are 2 identical bathrooms. One's male, one's female. You know, if I'm gender non-binary, you know, which way do I go? We do actually have a gender neutral restroom that is in the back here.
Should we make those gender neutral?
I have brought that up before because they're identical. Yeah, they're individual stalls too. It's not like you're going in with a lot. John.
So I'm gonna push a little bit. I think DCPC is welcoming to people that look like us, people that act like us. I wonder what it would be like if people started coming to worship that didn't act and behave like we act. I went to church once in Atlanta when I was on sabbatical, which was known to be very open. It was a Methodist church, and there were people of all stripes and flavors. Some that were cross-dressers that were very obvious. You know, lots of makeup, lots of big hair, loud. Wonder if those people started showing up here on Sunday morning and went to the 11 o'clock service.
Caldwell. I want to touch on girls.
I'm trying to find your statement because it is.
Caldwell's great, yeah. We should aspire to be Caldwell, in my opinion.
Because the people come from Cabarrus County, people come from South Carolina, people come, they drive from all over. To go to that church because of the suburb.
But then it had to start somewhere. Like I think we kind of got a ball rolling, we might make some progress, but then it takes some such.
For a long time, it's been in their statements. And well, I mean, you think about the first Presbyterian indicator, one of the very first things the pastors did there was sent their stained glass Jesus is black. I mean, they changed their stained glass. This was like, I don't know, 40 years ago when we had that. Then how long has the Church of Pilgrims of DC flown the American flag? I mean, well, we would think our youth there, all the churches, when I was here 30 years ago, we did that, they had to try the flag. So, I mean, part of it, I mean, when you talk about what's in the curriculum, what the visuals that we see as
Right.
well, I think Caldwell, maybe they could call it, and say, all the bathrooms. And like some. I mean,
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and worship, you know, the symbols we see in worship, the language we hear in worship, the sermon. I mean, we've made tremendous progress. You know, I credit John and Peter, and it's huge, and it is so meaningful and life-saving in some cases. So.
It's like somebody's pointing about Caldwell. I mean, Caldwell, pre-COVID, hosted the interfaith service for Charlotte Pride.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, they're pushing and they're out there and they're active.
The Charlotte Pride parade every year.
Yeah.
They're choir sings on the blue.
Yeah, and that's another thing, you know, year before last, DCPC for the first time had a contingent that we had a banner, and we participated in the Charlotte Pride Parade. And we want to do that again this year. Charlotte Pride is going to happen. The parade's going to be in October 24th. So we're going to work to try to get, you know, that word out. So any other observations? Carrie?
Sorry, but as maybe not everyone knows, I do have a transgender son who doesn't show his face at DCPC, right? I feel like he's exposed to a lot of anti-church rhetoric. And the fact that DCPC sends him a Christmas card, they reach out to him all the time
I told him about Peter's sermon. He knows, I think he knows, not saying that he would be welcome at this church. So I kind of figured, hey, you're 18, fine. But I'm thinking maybe when you're 28, 38, and you were, maybe there would be something in your life that you'll think, wow, I really would love a church when you walk in the door. So I think it's great to welcome, I'd love to have members, but you touched on something earlier about how we teach our youth. And I think, well, even if they're cisgender, whatever, even if they seem like they're not as born again, and I think about those songs, I probably seem like I was never born again in '83, but they actually are.
Yeah, Jeff.
Along those lines, I was kind of thinking one of the things that kind of helps my perspective, my thoughts, anyway. Along the youth, kind of adult city, I won't go with that with you, but adult city school, periodically, we've gotten a good scriptural examination of, Jesus said we get to anything about homosexuality as a form of power structure, issue, and so forth. Are we introducing that very early on to youth? Because that might be a place to plant that, like good care, and plant that seed early, that it's, you may hear others, but it's not a sin, not sin issue.
Right.
Behavior, it's science.
That's a good question. A couple of years ago, the syllabus that you all have is from a class I did in 2019 with the Covenant class. And, I spent a lot of time looking at those quote unquote clobber texts. And, I wasn't surprised, but I can't tell you how many people after that class came up to me and said, I had no idea that the term homosexual was inserted into the Bible in 1946, and all the other texts too, when you start to deconstruct them and do the exegetical work, you find at the best, they are incredibly unclear, And then on the flip side, look at all the gender identities and sexual identities that are represented in the Bible. It's really cool when you start to read it from a different perspective and actually look at the scholarship. So you're absolutely right. Yeah, Allison.
I actually recently been trying to remember when I said when he came faith of sexuality or something. Because I had gotten my daughter-in-law to rewrite the definitions from the older version and add it. And so I rewrote it 4 years ago, maybe. I can't remember the last time I was involved at that time, but I'm trying to remember if it was rewritten when he was there. I don't know. I think it's still on my heart. I mean, we're trying as best as what we did at that time to be inclusive. But whether the transgender piece was there or not, I honestly don't remember the date when I had to rewrite that for me. My daughter-in-law's master's in mental health and social work and works as a senior researcher now in psychiatrist, works on it. So I went to her and I said, how do I explain this to fifth graders and rewrite it? And I honestly can't remember. I remember he was very uncomfortable, as many fifth graders are, for that weekend. But I don't, and it's gone on.
Yeah, he probably just said the word red. He also.
Yeah.
Yeah, that kind of transcends everything.
Class that you referenced in the cover class, it was really nice to see a member of family in our congregation who brought their preteen child who,
Yeah.
from me looking in with like perhaps there was some transgender issues going on. I thought that was a really helpful context for that family had.
Yeah, thanks. Any other comments, observations?
Just to say that, we all evolve and, and I'll apologize for already this, but when Brad and I we were in a Presbyterian church in California, which we left because of their stance on gay people. And we went to a very liberal church that had transgender people, like 3 or 4. And at first it was a little I was a little like, whoa, okay. And we got to know that run with one of them for several years to retreat. So, I mean, we all evolve and we all get a little more comfortable with things that we were uncomfortable with. So
Yeah.
I think it just takes time, you know, to be patient with people and hopefully, you know, our church can evolve.
I've got Jane, I'll get you a sec. I just got to tell you all the story kind of on the flip side of it. I guess I am just so like incontrovertibly Presbyterian, because when I came out, you know, Princeton is near New York City. So we'd often take the train, and I had a friend who was attending the MCC church in New York City. Now, MCC is a Metropolitan Community Church, and it was founded by a former evangelical minister named Troy Perry. And the MCC comes out of a more evangelical place. So when I went to that service, there was a lot of hand raising, and I felt really uncomfortable because of that. Not because of, you know, the range of quote unquote flamboyant people, but I was like, oh my God, I can't deal with this. So yeah, I mean, it's like, you know, and LGBTQ folks bring in all sorts of experiences and things that make worship inviting or not inviting. So it's not, you know, a monolith. So just throwing that out there.
That's actually a good thing. It's still a good type of about maybe it's not an issue. But you're talking about that church. I wonder how much we can tease out our prejudices we hold versus, well, like you just alluded to, can you do a cultural, this is not what I understood.
Not the worship style, yeah.
Because I was thinking when you were talking about MCC, and I was growing up, before I became one of those liberal Southern Baptists, my grandfather was a Pentecostal holiness bishop. So, and I was churches there, and like tongue speaking and in the middle of the service, and I was like, so I think it might not be distinctive prejudices, just like
style.
And I don't know how quick to honor the existing style and still respect what the other people want, because and I know we need to be welcome.
Yeah.
But we are, and not that we are, basic theology is sound. But you see what I'm saying? We have to how they are.
Yeah.
How to accommodate everybody, because you don't want to change so much when you start chasing old people.
Right. Right. Well, you know, you have style, form, and then substance. You know, the substance of our Reformed theology, to me, is so powerful and so inviting once people come to understand what we believe. So yeah, I mean, again, I'm such a Presbyterian. I'm like, don't mess with our theology. Jane.
So to try to capture the 3 or 4 different comments since I originally raised my hand. One of those challenges for me is when we talked about, okay, we are this college, this church on this college campus. And yet, you know, another local house of worship that has Presbyterian in its connection. The reference over here to DOC and the number of members who come there. So I have had several conversations, some of you are aware, but several conversations back and forth with folks, that most of the denominations and their conversations around LGBTQ issues are about wanting to change those long-standing anti-LGBTQ issues. And how do we do that? And that's where those splits and those challenges are coming. And yet I turn around and I point out that this really cool style of worship, house of worship in our town, that within the last 5 years, their denomination stopped and rewrote and formed one of the most prolific anti-LGBTQ issue point papers And it started because their moderator of their general assembly for the denomination was the local guy that formed the local church. The meetings that formed this paper were held in Huntersville. And so you have all these people saying, well, we know that. No, I know of no other denomination that this recently, within all of our, within us, our time frame of doing that, specifically said, we're going to go on this point and we're going to quadruple time. And we're going to tell you how bad you are. We're going to equate your marriages to, pedophilia and everything. I mean, the laundry list. And it's like, and yet they claim to have more than 100 dates of college students on any Sunday morning. And is it their, as you were saying, is it their polity? Is it their what? Is it the style that's drawing folks in, and they're not digging deep enough to figure out what this church actually believes? So, I mean, and it causes me pain just because you're sitting and say, no, you have to dig, dig beneath the surface and figure out. So whether it's our style of worship in 9:45 or 8:30 or 11 o'clock, who's there? Well, what does the denomination that you belong to actually believe?
Are we, based on all kinds of school, member class, but is that being specifically? That we are, for lack of a better, pro-LGBT.
Yeah, the denomination has put out, I have some handouts from the General Assembly in 2018, not only reaffirmed that the PCUSA is an inclusive, affirming, welcoming denomination, but issued apologies to members of the LGBTQ community who, like me, were kind of kicked out, not to be ordained, and also, talked about ways that the denomination is now committed to reconcile, doing the process of reconciliation and doing better in the future. So, the PCUSA, I think, and they're developing wonderful resources. And I want to tell you quickly about two particular organizations. One is More Light Presbyterians. Now, they've been around for decades and 50 years, and More Light Presbyterians. And one of my fondest memories of seminary was being visited by a woman named Janie Spar. And we had a community of resistance within Princeton Seminary back in the early 90s. And this was a very, very difficult time because the GA was actually going to kind of make some decisions on ordination. And Princeton at that point in time was led by a president who was very, very anti-LGBTQ. But Janie came and we literally met in an upper room of one of the buildings in the seminary. And, her presence there with us was so life-giving. But More Light Presbyterians are still around. Their executive director is a trans man by the name of Alex McNeil, and Alex is in Asheville. And it is my hope and intention that we can get Alex here at one point in time to speak to us. So you have More Light, they've been around for about 50 years, and Covenant Network is another organization that has been really instrumental within our denomination. And Covenant is led by a gay gentleman named Brian Ellison. And I've spoken with Brian. Our social justice committee had a conversation with him right before COVID hit, because we were going to invite Brian to come speak. And another thing that Covenant does is they will help churches kind of do a self-evaluation. So Allison, you asked, well, where are we? Are we really being welcoming and inclusive and affirming? They'll come in and take a look at all the stuff that we do and help us think through, ways we can improve.
It's important to note that Covenant Network was founded by a group that included Doug Oldenburg.
Right.
And they had their annual meeting in this building maybe 15 years ago. I really don't remember the date.
Yeah, I didn't know that actually, Bill. Thank you. Right.
2010-ish.
Yeah. So our denomination is doing good things. And, you know, I think we can use all those resources to our benefit as, you know, we seek to build upon the work that we've done here. We have about 5 minutes left, and I just want to get a couple more comments. I want to touch upon what Jane said about in the article that we had about how do churches be more welcoming and inclusive. There's another element too. How do churches be clear about what we believe? You know, Jane said that, you know, EPC, PCA, sometimes they're not real, they don't foreground that they have really, really anti-LGBTQ policies. So folks will come in and maybe they'll like the music, they'll like the worship style, like the pastor, and then boom, get ambushed.
It's not your parents' church, because they can drink coffee and be super happy.
Right, right.
Yeah, so I wonder, or I'll say the physical property of this church, I think is beautiful. And I walk into our sanctuary and I just think, oh, it's just very worshipful to me. But I wonder if the physical property of UCBC is itself intimidating, not necessarily the LGBTQ, but other people are like, well, that's horrible church, I want to. And then they dismiss the theology and they just love that was mom and dad's church. This is
Yeah.
I'm sure there are ways.
Joe?
We struggle with that, so can't we struggle with that a lot. You know, it's a care struggles with that from Bob. You know, she's our voice to all the students. And what do we say? And I think you're right there. It's still looks cozy and traditional. And these all other folks in school and all their community. But how much do you say? They're not only, they're also anti-women.
Yeah, PCA is.
And so here you have all these young women from Davidson College coming and to the church to say, be part of us. Not ever saying a word about whether what your role might be to become part of us.
And this is intentional on behalf of their denomination.
Yeah.
We have Claire, we have 0.75 of a campus minister. The EPC church has 3 fully funded chaplains on the Davidson College campus. This is intentional. This is absolutely.
How do you say, we don't have done this, but do you say to the students, do you know who they are? You can't do that.
Jane Campbell has an idea.
Seriously? What's what it calls?
I don't know. I just say, again, I don't think what we are our worship. I just want you to go into any house of worship with eyes wide open. Know who they are, know what they believe, and know what the denomination's theology is. But we should be asking for any activity, I mean, for as much as is going on, this is a completely different discussion in terms of where the college is with the discussion on reform theologies. But at least know all of the stuff that is there and don't be lured in by music or whatever conversation, because this, to me, like I said, is absolutely intentional. This is how they're going to cultivate the next generation. And not that they say, oh, well, Presbyterian church too.
Yeah, well, on that note, we're out of time for today. I mean, I just want to tell y'all, this could be a year-long study, and I'm grateful to, like I said, the Faith Formation Committee and John for getting this ball rolling. I do want to say that the Social Justice Committee in August and September leading up to Pride will be doing some focused presentations, events around LGBTQ people and faith. One of the things I'm really excited about is we're going to show a documentary called Out of Order, and it features interviews with my peers, many of them who went through that called the ordination wars, and also some younger folks who are now thankfully ordained ministers of Word and Sacrament within the PCUSA. So I hope to show that later this summer. Next week, we're going to talk more about gender identity. And what I'll do is, I'm going to ask John to help me with this, maybe is send out to the group, the folks that have signed up, a glossary or a lexicon on the vocabulary around gender identity, also sexual identity too, because language changes, language shifts. And it's always so helpful to, you know, when a young person comes up to me and says, well, I identify as demisexual, that I know kind of what that means. And it helps me be a more welcoming presence.